Welcome back to P&P Goes to the Movies. We're talking about the decade's best political movies. Joining us again to discuss some of their picks, award-winning director Peter Raymont, and in Vancouver, the Minister of Heritage, James Moore. Minister, let's just give it. You've talked about Milk as number 5. Take us through 4 to 1, your best political movies of the last decade.
Milk, I'd have number 5. Number 4, I'd have 13 Days, a great film about the Cuban Missile Crisis. Very well done, as I said, imposing archival footage. It's very, very well done. At number 3, I'd have Munich, Steven Spielberg's film. But before you watch Munich, you should watch the documentary One Day in September about the incredible drama on Colonystrasse. So watch that and then watch Munich. And then number 2, I have The Queen, which shows the great love of country of both Her Majesty and also Tony Blair dealing through the crisis of the death of Princess Diana, and how both of them have different needs and responsibilities to the broader public. And the top movie that I have is Charlie Wilson's War. Tom Hanks stars in it. You can't overlook the remarkable performance by Philip Seymour Hoffman as Gus Davokados, the top CIA guy on the Afghanistan desk. He does a brilliant performance, and that movie really does sort of highlight there's a Zen master story, and look out for the Zen master story, which is basically be careful what you wish for, and that foreign policy is the science of single instances, which is to say no science at all, and that every country has its own dynamic.
Right, and let's take a clip of Charlie Wilson's War. It was a Hollywood film, as you say, Tom Hanks, Seymour Philip Hoffman, a marvelous movie, very prescient to a certain degree about Afghanistan, to a large degree, of course. Let's take a clip of that film.
Why is Congress saying one thing and doing nothing?
Oh, tradition, mostly.
You sit at the intersection of the State Department, the Pentagon, and the CIA. The 3 agencies you would need to conduct a covert war.
Yeah.
Minister, so many great political films. Why did that one strike you as resonating the loudest over the decade?
Well, the movie came out, I think, just last year. I think in the first part of last year, and obviously it fed into a bit of a contemporary debate. But it combines what a lot of political movies do, which is sort of the Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, the yes I can, yes we can, individual, one individual can make a difference. And in this case, a historic account, an individual did make a difference. But it also shows sometimes how entire enterprises can be fraught with real difficulty when people think that it's that simple.
All right, so James Moore, he's got Milk, 13 Days, Munich, The Queen, and Charlie Wilson's War as it's his number 1. Let's go to Peter Raymont. Peter, give us your 5 to 1, your 5th to your first best film.
Well, I've got them here in front of me. Number 5, I'll do The Most Dangerous Man in America, Daniel Ellsberg and the Pentagon Papers. Extraordinary new film, premiered at the Toronto Film Festival. Ellsberg is probably the most important whistleblower of our time, and what he revealed helped to end the Vietnam War, many would argue. Fahrenheit 9/11, you can't argue with this film. Michael Moore, love him or hate him, it's an extraordinary film. 9/11 won the Palme d'Or at Cannes, grossed over $200 million worldwide, probably the highest grossing documentary of all time. Motorcycle Diaries, I love this film. I guess that's number 3 by Walter Salles, the Brazilian. Beautiful film. Full of life and spirit. The Lives of Others, number 2. Donner Smark, the best foreign language film, 2007. An extraordinary film about the Stasi, the East German secret police that spied on everyone. And number 1, The Fog of War, the subtitle being 11 Lessons from the Life of Robert McNamara, a man who really wanted to tell, or really wanted to get it out of his system, what had happened during Vietnam. And Errol Morris is a brilliant filmmaker. Yeah,
let's take a clip of that. Errol Morris, a wonderful filmmaker. He has this candid series of interviews, and he really captures what happened, what the argument without end, as Robert McNamara wrote in his books about the Vietnam War. Let's take a clip of that. This is Peter Raymont's top political film of the decade.
I think the human race needs to think more about killing. How much evil must we do in order to do good?
Those are all great films. Minister, what role, you are in the trenches of the political debate all the time, and Peter Raymont said, films are the literature of our time. What role do political movies play, do you think, in terms of shaping how the public responds and understands issues?
Well, I don't think you can underestimate the impact of a lot of films that have clearly moved public debate. I mean, Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth, Schindler's List brought a whole new generation of people to sympathize and empathize and understand the horrors of the Holocaust. I mean, films have a way of touching people, just as music does, just as art does, just as conversation and debate sometimes do, you hope. That these are all different ways in which people consume information and consume and have their senses and emotions danced with, and this is what film is about. And when it's done well, it can be done in a masterful way. You take, for example, Fog of War, which was a brilliant documentary about Robert McNamara, but more about the lessons of war. And they developed a whole new way in which to tell stories. They have it was called the Interatron, which is, I know, Evan, you get through all your shows with your intellect and charisma, and you never use a teleprompter. But when they made that movie, they actually used teleprompters, and instead of putting words on the screen, they had Earl Morris's face on the screen so that they can get a new intimacy with Robert McNamara as he was wrestling with his language and how he was explaining the Second World War and incendiary bombs and the use of technology and the mechanization of war, and this degree of intimacy that they captured through that film is really impressive. And when he talks about his relationship with Castro and the conversations after the Cuban Missile Crisis, it's drama that can't be beat.
Absolutely.
I think the important lesson.
Go ahead, Peter. Yeah.
That film's about lessons. The subtitle is 11 Lessons from Robert McNamara. And his first lesson is empathize with the enemy. Put yourself in the other man's shoes, in the other person's shoes, and try to understand what they're feeling, what they're going through. It's a lesson I think we all have to learn. We all have to keep learning in dealing with international conflict, in dealing with each other every day.
And you really understand different things. Let me just give you my top political movies of the decade, and we'll start with number 5 here. I started with a Canadian film by Jennifer Batechwell called Manufactured Landscapes. This won the top prize at the Toronto Film Festival, a documentary based on Ed Burtynsky, the photography of Ed Burtynsky, the great Canadian photographer. But it really talks about the cost of environmental damage. She goes to China. It's an absolutely brilliant film, did incredibly well across Canada, and an important film shedding light on what the costs to the earth on human industry. A remarkable film. My next, we mentioned this one, Bowling for Columbine. I agree with you, Peter. Like him or hate him, Moore's a serious filmmaker, and he's made a real difference. And he's hard to ignore. This film was very important on gun control. The Minister, you talked about Milk. I put that at number 3. Just an extraordinary performance and a wonderful story, and an important film. And it shows the power when Hollywood puts its unique talents to work on a historical film. It can make a big difference. 2, An Inconvenient Truth. Whatever you think about Al Gore, that film was a blockbuster documentary and had a huge impact, and maybe the most politically explosive film that we've seen documentary. The number 1 film for me was Waltz with Bashir. This is an Israeli film. It's an animated documentary. Both of you talked about mixing stock footage and animation and documentaries and feature films mixing. This is by Ari Folman. It was an extraordinarily almost like Israel's Apocalypse Now film, very powerful film, and did very well around the world. Here's a clip of it.
אני חושב שתלך תברר מה קרה שם באמת. איך אתה קשור לזה?
This was based on actual interviews of Ari that Ari did, and very, very important film. Minister, I just wonder, in your political discussions with fellow ministers, are movie references when these things come out? We talk about An Inconvenient Truth, you talked about these things. Are these the kind of things that are referenced when you're dealing with these subjects?
They are. I mean, it's pretty hard not to. You see it often actually in the House of Commons. Believe it or not, there are moments when it's not just yelling, screaming, and heckling. When people actually get up and provide a substantive intervention, and people reference movies because it's an area of common discourse. Too often in politics we talk about Bill C number whatever and an amendment to this, and last year's debate, and in the campaign you said it, but in the platform they said. And you know, these are points of common reference, of common example, of it's a shared social experience going to a movie. And so when you can say, do you remember the girl in the little red coat in Schindler's List? Do you remember how that hit you? Or you can talk about, do you remember on Omaha Beach in Saving Private Ryan and what the message was about when Tom Hanks held the hand of Private Ryan at the end of the movie and said, earn this. You know, those kinds of moments are shared moments, and we should always, you know, we should have more of those.
Yeah, and interesting, Peter, last word to you. You know, on these political shows like ours, we talk about the issues, we talk to people, but getting at the emotional impact, the human impact of politics, the costs of it. Sometimes only films can do that.
Indeed. I mean, sometimes
I
films
agree.
do it.
And it's nice.
Sorry, go ahead, Peter.
It's nice to hear. It's nice to hear the minister supporting political documentaries and political films, and I assume that means his government will be supporting the production of these films in Canada.
We always have, we always are. We support the arts better than any government in Canadian history, and proudly so.
That's good to hear.
We're going to the movies and a political discussion breaks out, and we couldn't help it. Minister Moore, greatly appreciate your list and you coming on and your support for film. Peter Raymont, also your support and production of film. Both of you, thanks so much for coming on Power and Politics
Thanks
today.
a lot.
We'll put